The summer Derek Cole turned 17, he made a decision that most people in Ridgewood considered quietly strange. He stopped trying to look like someone worth noticing. He wore plain shirts. He kept his hair short and unremarkable. He walked to school along the back roads instead of the main street, not because he was ashamed of anything, but because he had learned, in ways most teenagers never have to, that the world moves differently when it doesn't see you coming. His father understood this without being told. His mother, who had passed 4 years earlier from an illness that took 8 months and left both of them permanently altered, had been the one to first put him in the gym, not to make him tough, but because she said stillness needed somewhere to go. Derek had never forgotten that. He carried it the way he carried everything she left behind, quietly, completely, without complaint. That particular evening he was sitting on the porch steps with a worn mechanic's manual across his knees and grease worked so deep into his fingertips that no amount of soap had ever fully touched it. The sun was still above the tree line, casting long amber shadows across the yard, and the neighborhood was doing what it always did at this hour, settling, breathing, letting the day exhale. Mrs. Patterson was watering her roses across the street. 2 kids from the next block were riding bicycles in slow, lazy circles at the end of the cul-de-sac. Derek was thinking about the carburetor he needed to return to Mr. Hart before 8 the following morning, and about whether the threading on the left bolt had stripped just enough to cause a problem down the line, and about absolutely nothing else, right up until the sound came. It started as a vibration before it became a noise. 3 engines, heavy and deliberately loud, the kind of machines built not for speed but for presence. Derek heard them turn onto his street without looking up. He heard them slow. He heard them stop. And only then, after a pause that lasted exactly long enough to be intentional, did he raise his eyes. They were not men who needed to introduce themselves. Everything about them did at first: the scarred leather jackets, the patches sewn with the kind of permanence that suggested membership in something that did not welcome resignation, the heavy boots that pressed into the asphalt with the weight of men who had spent years making rooms feel smaller just by entering them. The largest of the 3 dismounted in the unhurried way of someone who has never once felt the need to rush, because the world had always arranged itself to wait. He was broad and heavy across the shoulders, somewhere in his mid-30s, with tattoos that climbed his neck in dark, tangled patterns and eyes that had the flat, assessing quality of a man who categorized people in the first 3 seconds and rarely revised his conclusions. The other 2 stayed mounted, engines running, smoke curling upward from the exhaust in thin grey threads. The large one walked across the yard and stopped 2 feet from where Derek sat. He looked down at him the way men like that always look, with the mild, almost bored confidence of someone who has never once had a porch conversation go against him. "Your old man runs the parts shop on Main Street," he said. It was not a question. It was a statement being used as a door, and what he intended to walk through it with was already visible in his posture. Derek closed the book. Not quickly, not with any theatrical slowness. Just closed it, the way you close something when the thing you were doing is finished and something else has begun. He looked up at the man without shifting in his seat, without squaring his shoulders, without doing any of the things that young men do when they are afraid and trying very hard not to show it. "Yeah," he said. "Then tell your old man he sold us a dead carburetor. Burned out inside a week. We lost a job over it. Lost money. And that," the man said, tilting his head slightly, "is not something we allow to just disappear." There was a version of this moment, Derek knew, where a 17-year-old boy looked at these 3 men, looked at the idling bikes, looked at the absolute certainty in the large man's face, and felt the ground shift beneath him. There was a version where his voice came out unsteady, where his hands found each other in his lap without him telling them to, where the animal part of his brain overruled every other part and screamed at him to apologize, to agree to whatever they wanted, to make himself small enough that they would simply lose interest and leave. He had seen that version happen to other people. He understood it. He did not blame anyone who lived inside it. But Derek Cole had spent 4 years in a coal gymnasium 3 blocks from his house, on his knees and on his back and on his feet again, learning something that most people never learn in a lifetime, that fear and action are not opposites, that you can be afraid all the way to your bones and still move with complete precision, that the body, trained long enough and hard enough, does not wait for the mind to stop being frightened. It simply moves. "He's not home right now," Derek said. "If there's a warranty issue, bring the part to the shop. We stand behind everything we sell." The man's expression shifted, not to anger, not yet, but to something adjacent to amusement. The kind of amusement that precedes something uglier. "A warranty," he repeated, letting the word sit between them like something mildly ridiculous. "Kid, look at me." He waited until Derek met his eyes. Do you understand what you're looking at right now? We didn't ride over here to fill out a form. We came to make something clear. And since your daddy isn't home, you're going to be our reminder, the kind he doesn't forget. Behind him, the second biker cut his engine. The silence that followed was louder than the noise had been. He swung off the bike and started across the grass, and there was nothing casual about the way he moved. Derek stood up. He did it slowly, without urgency, the book tucked under one arm. He was not tall. He was not wide. There was nothing about the exterior of him, the plain shirt, the worn sneakers, the quiet face, that communicated anything other than an ordinary teenager who had been sitting on a porch reading about engines. And that, he had learned, was perhaps the most important thing his years of training had given him. Not the throws. Not the locks. Not the ability to redirect a man's weight against him in a fraction of a second. Those were tools. The most important thing was this, the complete and total absence of performance. He was not trying to look dangerous. He simply was what he was, all the way through, with nothing extra added and nothing real hidden. I'm going to give you one chance to leave, he said. His voice was the same as it had always been in that conversation, level, unhurried, almost gentle. I mean that sincerely. Take it. The large man stared at him for one full second. Then he laughed. It came out of him in a burst, genuine and unguarded, and the second man laughed too, and even the one still on the bike let out a low sound of amusement, as if Derek had just said something charmingly absurd, the kind of thing you tell people later, at a bar, shaking your head. You hear this, kid? The large man looked back at his partner, still smiling. He's giving us a chance. The smile disappeared in an instant, replaced by something flat and final. He nodded once. Grab him. The second man reached out, a hard, grabbing motion aimed at Derek's shoulder, the kind of grip that was meant to communicate immediately and completely that the situation was no longer open for discussion. He never made contact. Derek stepped left, smooth and without hesitation, letting the arm travel past him into empty air. Both his hands found the man's wrist in the same motion, and what followed was not a brawl. It was not a struggle. It was geometry, the clean, inevitable geometry of force redirected, momentum borrowed, weight turned against itself. The second biker left the ground, described a short arc, and landed on his back in the grass with a sound that seemed to stop time. He lay completely still, staring at the sky, every bit of air gone from his lungs all at once. The large man was already moving. Derek was already ready. What happened in the next 4 seconds would stay with Ray Mercer for the rest of his life. Not because of the pain, though the pain was real, and not because of the shock, though that was real too. It would stay with him because of what was absent. There was no rage in the boy's eyes. No adrenaline, no trembling, no satisfaction. Just presence, absolute, complete, unhurried presence, as though this was simply a thing that needed doing, and he was doing it, the same way you tighten a bolt or close a gate. Ray had been in enough confrontations over enough years to know what fear looked like when it was being suppressed, what anger looked like when it was being controlled, what ego looked like when it was being performed. This was none of those things. This was something he did not have a word for, and the absence of that word unsettled him more than the lock on his elbow ever could. The throw had been instantaneous. Ray had seen it happen to his partner Cody and had processed it the way the mind processes things that contradict its assumptions, with a half-second delay, a refusal, and then a cold, flooding acceptance. Cody was on the ground. Cody, who outweighed this boy by 60 pounds, who had played defensive end in high school and never quite lost the habits of it, was lying in the grass of a stranger's front yard, staring at the sky, making a sound like a man trying to remember how breathing works. And the boy was already facing Ray, already balanced, already still, with both hands loose at his sides and his feet exactly shoulder-width apart and his eyes carrying that same expression, calm, clear, almost sorrowful, as though he had hoped this wouldn't be necessary and was now simply present for the fact that it was. Ray threw the punch. He knew how to throw a punch. He had been throwing punches since he was 14 years old in a neighborhood that rewarded that particular education, and this one carried everything. His weight, his reach, his years, his absolute certainty that the boy would freeze. Instead, the boy was simply no longer where he had been. The fist moved through air. And then something caught his forearm. Not grabbed it, caught it, the way you catch a door that's swinging too hard, and the world tilted, and Ray found himself bent forward at the waist with his elbow locked at an angle that communicated, with perfect biological clarity, that any further movement in any direction would result in something he could not undo. He stopped moving. The pressure was firm but not savage. That was the thing that got to him most, even in that moment, even with his knee finding the ground and his breath coming short. The boy was not hurting him beyond what was necessary to stop him. There was no punishment in it. There was only precision, and beneath the precision, something that felt almost like restraint born from principle rather than from mercy, as though the boy had decided long ago, in some quiet room inside himself, exactly how far he would ever go and exactly where he would stop, and he was simply honoring that decision now. "Don't move," the boy said. Ray didn't. Behind him he could hear the third man, Vince, drop off his motorcycle. He heard the footsteps in the grass. And then he heard them stop. And in the silence that followed he understood, without needing to see it, that Vince had looked at the boy and seen the same thing Ray had seen and arrived at the same wordless conclusion, that there was nothing here to press. That whatever they had ridden over here to collect, this was not the place, and this boy was not the person, and the evening had gone in a direction that none of them had scripted. "Who are you?" Ray asked. His voice came out lower than he intended, stripped of its performance. "The son of the man you came here to threaten," the boy said. Nothing more than that. And then the lock released. Cleanly, immediately, with a small backward step that put distance between them and made it unmistakable. This was not a stumble, not a loss of grip. It was a choice. The boy had chosen to let him go, and the choosing of it was as deliberate and as visible as everything else had been. Ray straightened slowly. He worked his elbow in a small circle, testing it. Nothing was damaged. He stood in the yard of a house on a quiet residential street in the late afternoon light and looked at a 17-year-old boy in a plain shirt who was calmly picking a book up off the porch steps, and he felt something move through him that he had not felt since he was very young, something close to the feeling you get when you realize, belatedly, that you have fundamentally misread a situation that mattered. Cody had managed to sit up in the grass. He was holding one hand to his ribs and breathing in careful, deliberate increments, and the expression on his face was the expression of a man who has had a long-held belief quietly and irrevocably revised. Vince stood near his motorcycle with his arms at his sides and said nothing. "The carburetor for your model runs about $80, the boy said, tucking the book under his arm with the same unhurried ease he'd had at the start of all this. "Warranty covers 6 months from date of purchase. Come to the shop tomorrow morning. I'll tell my father to expect you." He looked at Ray for just a moment longer. "There won't be any trouble." It was the last sentence that did something to Ray's chest. Not the information in it, the tone of it. There won't be any trouble. Not a warning. Not a concession. A promise, extended without conditions, to men who had just come to his home with the full intention of using his son as a bargaining tool. Ray opened his mouth, and then closed it, because whatever he might have said felt suddenly very small in the space that sentence had created. The boy went inside. The door closed without drama, without force, without anything. Just closed, the way doors close when the person going through them has somewhere to be and nothing left to prove. The three of them stood in the yard for a long moment. The street was quiet. Mrs. Patterson's sprinkler had stopped. The kids on the bicycles had gone in for dinner. The sun had dropped another degree behind the trees, and the shadows were longer now, and somewhere in the neighborhood a dog barked once and went silent. Ray looked at Cody. Cody looked at the ground. Vince looked at nothing in particular. They rode away without speaking. Ray did not sleep well that night. He lay in the dark of his apartment above the garage on the east side of town and stared at the ceiling and turned the evening over and over in his mind the way you turn something over when you're looking for the angle that makes it make sense. He had ridden to that house with a grievance, legitimate or not, framed the right way or not, approached the right way or not, and what had met him there was something he had not been equipped to process. He kept coming back to the same moment. Not the throw, not the lock, not any of the physical things. He kept coming back to the voice. Quiet. Level. Almost gentle. "I'm going to give you one chance to leave." The fact that the boy had meant it. The fact that when they hadn't taken the chance, he had done exactly what was necessary and nothing more, and then offered the chance again on the other side of it. "Come to the shop tomorrow, there won't be any trouble," as though the door had never really closed at all. Ray had known hard men his entire life. He had grown up around them, ridden with them, become one by degrees so gradual he had never noticed the transformation happening. And the thing about hard men, the thing he had always understood as a kind of unspoken law, was that hardness announced itself. It needed to be seen to function. It fed on the reaction it produced in others. Without the reaction, it was nothing. This boy had produced no reaction at all. He had simply been solid and quiet and completely without need for anything Ray's presence could offer or remove. And that, Ray understood lying in the dark, was not hardness. That was something older than hardness. Something that hardness was always, at its core, a poor imitation of. He arrived at the shop the next morning at 9:15. Cody and Vince came with him, and none of them discussed it on the ride over, and none of them needed to. They left the leather jackets at home. Ray carried the burnt carburetor in a paper bag and the warranty receipt folded in his shirt pocket, and when he pushed open the door of Cole's Parts and the bell above it rang and the boy looked up from behind the counter, the same steady eyes, the same unhurried expression, Ray felt something in him settle, like a weight that had been held at shoulder height for too long finally being set down. There were 3 cups of coffee on the counter. Already there. Already waiting. Ray stopped walking. He looked at the cups. He looked at the boy. "You knew we'd come," he said. Derek looked at him evenly. "I hoped you would," he said. And the difference between those two things, knowing and hoping, landed somewhere in Ray's chest and stayed there. Tom Cole emerged from the back, wiping his hands on a shop rag, and handled the warranty claim with the brisk, uncomplicated decency of a man who had been doing honest work for 20 years and saw no reason to make it complicated now. New part, covered in full, labor reimbursed. No lecture. No performance of magnanimity. Just the work, done right, the way it should have been. When they were leaving, Ray stopped at the door. He didn't plan to. His hand was on the frame and the question came out before he decided to ask it. "Where do you train?" "Nakamura's," Derek said. 3 blocks east. Ray nodded. Walked out. Swung onto his bike. Sat there for a moment with his hands on the grips before he started the engine, looking at nothing, feeling the morning air move around him, thinking about what it meant to spend 35 years becoming one kind of man and then spend one evening understanding, without any room for argument, that there was another kind entirely, and that the other kind was 17 years old and had offered him coffee before he walked through the door. He started the engine. Rode east. Counted 3 blocks. Looked at the small, unassuming building with the hand-painted sign above the door. Sat outside it for a long moment. Then he took off his helmet, tucked it under his arm, and went inside to ask about enrollment.